Right.
Okay. 3. My hair's okay. Okay.
Yeah, just a little spit on your hair there.
Okay. All right. So 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. We are here again with the only one, Dr. Stuart McGill, and we will have this Q&A moment to have some contribution for our Americans, for our Brazilians trainers. And Dr. Stuart, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, good morning, Carlos, and thanks to you and for all of your leadership in Brazil.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. So, Doctor, we had many questions at the Instagram and people having some doubts. Can you help us to clarify these and try to give more information for our Brazilians?
Yeah, well, I can try.
Very good. So I have my phone here with the questions, and the first question that I put here for you is, what is the best exercise to keep lumbar spine strong?
Yes. Well, there is no singular answer. The answer always is converged upon by an appropriate assessment. And the assessment will show what are the goals of the person. So maybe getting their spine strong is at the expense of another goal. Maybe it's not just the right goal. So that's a good discussion to have. And then if they have a history of back pain, they will do much better if they have a thorough assessment that shows the mechanism causing their pain. And then the best exercise, first and foremost, becomes the one that addresses the cause of pain. Then as the pain winds down, now we can have a more targeted discussion on what is the best exercise with the greatest reward and the least risk of triggering pain. Or again, there's so many different types of strength. Is it a grinding strength? Is it a speed strength? Is it a soccer field strength? Or is it a martial arts strength? Or is it a deadlift strength for international powerlifting? But that's the way to go about answering that question for everybody. And the real issue is it's very difficult to get assessments in the medical system. There's no billing code, or there's no doctor who will set aside the amount of time it takes to do a thorough assessment to understand the mechanisms of pain or to understand the person's goals, etc. So that's why we wrote Back Mechanic, and you translated it into Portuguese to guide the reader through a self-assessment of their pains. And then from there, it shows them what to do and what not to do to build a pain-free foundation. Now that opens up quite a large area for what is the best exercise to achieve whatever speed, strength, slow strength, agility.
Very good. Got it. Very good information, Doctor. Thank you. Second question here. Which exercises are more efficient to treat patients with low back pain? Again, I think back to almost the same answer, right?
Well, it is. Get a thorough assessment and know the cause. Now, the cause, a thorough assessment will sometimes show, oh, well, there is a dynamic disc bulge on the fourth lumbar root. Your little toes are going to sleep. There's right-sided back pain, etc. Or it may simply be an assessment that says, if you sit upright, there's no pain. If you slouch, there is pain, or there's pain when you extend. So if you put it in terms of motions, postures, and loads as to the trigger of pain, now you know, well, instead of bending through the spine, if you can bend through the hips, or if you can turn and reach with a drop step, in other words, an appropriate footwork pattern might be the first way to practice hygiene, which is to remove the cause. So it might be footwork, it might be mobility, it might be stability, it might be movement patterns, whatever. But wind the pain down. That's the first most efficient exercise to treat back pain. And then, of course, moving on to the big three for spine stability, and there will be some targeted hip mobility, no doubt, exercises. But again, it's the assessment that reveals the pathway to all of this.
Very good. And the next one here, I think is more about thoracic spine, and I don't know if you can answer. You already saw the question, but the question is, what are the best exercises to fix kyphosis thoracic, and what is the best strategy to fight for the other 23 hours?
Right.
Try to understand here. This is from Ulysses. Ulysses was there in one of our courses, and he's more concerned about the thoracic position of the spine. How can we try to fix this? Maybe, I don't know if you can answer, because it's another part of the spine. And how can we treat for the other 23 hours? These are very
right.
Good.
Well, again, there is no answer that is the right answer for everybody, but a thoracic kyphosis is this kind of postural situation. Usually there is a hardware component, which is the body, and there is a software component, which is the mind. And the same exercises won't address both. So perhaps the trainer or coach or therapist will do some thoracic extension work. And so once those hardware exercises are finished, the person has a nice stacked posture. There's less load on their back, there's less pain, etc. And you can start training doing some rows, TRX rows, or doing push-ups or whatever. Within 5 minutes, the person is right back to this position. So you see, that is a habit. The coach or the trainer or the therapist gave them the hardware change to achieve a neutral spine and taking load out. However, the person's habit, their image was this. So how do you change muscle memory and body imagery? That is something that some people get very easily and others really struggle with. So it requires a constant reminder to keep performing that correction. And then that's a whole different type of exercise category. You repeat it often, you're changing behavior. And that's small doses repeated throughout the day.
Very good. How much is important the carry exercise for the spine? These guys talking about the carry walks exercise.
Right. Well, in some people, it's not important at all. They're quite fine. But the next person really needs some frontal plane torso control and stiffness and stability and athleticism. So a walking carry is one of the most efficient ways to achieve that. But then there's all sorts of walking carries. There's the suitcase carry where there's a load in each hand that people are familiar with. Then there's the type of carry where you just have load in one hand. That's called the suitcase carry. Interestingly enough, when we measured and compared the stress through the body with a suitcase versus a farmer's walk, the farmer's is symmetric load. It's actually easier on the spine, even though you're carrying double the load. And if you put down the load in one hand and you carry half the load, in other words, in one hand, it's actually more load on the back, because now the muscles have to work harder to offset the loaded side, and they impose more compression than the weight if the person was carrying a farmer's. So there's all sorts of different variants, and we get right back to the same old answer. We're choosing exercise tools that have the highest risk sorry, the highest reward and the least risk. Maybe a bottoms up kettlebell carry. If the person needs more core control, I hate the word core, but spine control, if there's pain involved and this kind of thing. So there's, it's the same answer every time for these questions. It comes back to the assessment and knowing the mechanism and then programming the right correction, whether it's software, hardware, unilateral, bilateral carries, whatever the case may be. Otherwise, all the trainers would be replaced by robots. But it's a science and an art, and that's what makes a masterful trainer. Someone who reads the client and then knows the science and the art to converge on the right exercise prescription.
I believe that is our mission, to make people understand about the assessment, because people just keep applying some exercise and they do not know yet if this exercise is the most appropriate for this person. They just make exercise, and our course, they can learn about the assessments, about the importance to find the trigger pain, right? And can help a lot. The hamstring stretching helps the prevention of low back pain. I love this question.
Right. The hamstring. And the answer is, once again, it depends. More than half the time, so we track this with the various back pain people who come to Backfitpro headquarters here. More than half the time when they complain that they have hamstring tightness and we measure the mechanism, it's not tightness of the hamstring, it's tightness in the sciatic nerve, which runs beside the hamstring and gives them the perception. So what they do is twice a day, they might stretch their hamstrings and they get a 20-minute relief. Well, what they did was they fired off the stretch receptors, which gave them an analgesic perception, but it didn't change the perception of tightness in the hamstrings. And it wasn't until most of the time it's a discogenic disorder in their back, usually from a disc bulge, irritating a sciatic nerve. And when we address that, the hamstring tightness goes away. So that's more than half the time. But sometimes if the hamstrings truly are tight, there's the science shows two different paths to take that one as well. When you look at the military studies that assess new recruits coming into the Army and they measure back pain and hamstring tightness, there's no strong link between having tighter hamstrings or not and whether the person has back pain, unless the hamstrings are very, very extreme. The person can't get near their shoes. In other words, they really stress their back to tie their shoes, might be an example. However, those same studies show that if you have asymmetric hamstring tightness, that usually is linked to a higher prevalence of back pain. And it's more noticeable in people who run and cycle, for example. If they have one tighter side than the other, that puts a bending stress with each cycle on the bike or each running stride. So do you see it may be hamstring or it may not be. And if it is hamstring, then the highest priority would go to the asymmetry in hamstring tightness.
Got it. Good. Another question, when are you going to Brazil to teach a course?
Well, I don't know. This virus situation has really changed a lot of things. What we're planning is to put my lectures into online courses, and people can sign up for those. And then we will have the skills development courses. You can't teach those online. You have to be able to. So we would, Dr. Cambridge and Joel Proskovitz, who have been to Brazil a number of times, they will come and teach the hands-on in small courses.
Good. Limit of compressive loads at the lumbar spine with the goal of a safe work. This question was hard for me to understand. Did you understand clearly this?
Well, I think I understand where the question is coming from. So every biological system has a limit. And if you cross the limit, injury will occur. So there's a one-time load limit that if you put compression on a person's back, if you exceed that limit, something bad will happen. It's usually an end plate fracture that would be the first sign of micro damage if you cross the compressive load. Now you can reach that limit faster by doing repeated loads of a smaller magnitude. Or if you have that load on for a long period of time, you reach that limit with a lower load as well. So the load that causes the injury decreases with duration of time and the number of loads. But now here's the interesting answer. It can also strengthen the person's bones and resilience to that. So if you look at the great power lifters, for example, the ones who are still lifting into their 40s, so they're very robust, strong athletes. They have tremendous compressive load in their back. But when you study how they train, typically they'll do a round of squats or deadlifts once a week. And then the rest of the week is about healing those very little micro fractures that they've caused. And so those micro fractures are actually a good thing. That's stimulated adaptation, healing, and bone strength. But the poorer trainers will say, let's do deadlifts 3 times a week, not realizing that they're building up cumulative micro damage. And I'm talking at the bone cell level. And over time, they will accumulate damage faster than the rate that the body is adapting. So do you see, it's an interesting question, but generally, the heavier you train, the less frequently you train. But, you know, that's not the way of social media these days, where they're always pressing, try and get the next personal best. Once you've achieved your personal best, go and achieve the next one. Well, you know, you look at Ed Cohn, who was one of the best power lifters in human history. And he would say if he set a personal best, he took time off then. And Brian Carroll will tell you, then you deload. Let your body adjust to that new reality and heal. That's when the strength is really built. And then in your next training cycle, you start building once again. But Ed Cohn would try for maybe 1 or 2 personal bests in a year. But again, that's not what is in the psychology of a lot of people on the internet, for example, on social media now.
Got it. When a bad posture of the spine do not cause pain and a neutral posture cause pain, what to do?
Well, that's an interesting question, but the assessment should reveal that once again. What is the mechanism of pain? And now you've just identified that it's posturally driven. Certain postures are pain-free and certain postures cause it. The assessment is required to show us why, and then we'll have a clue as to how to proceed on it.
Got it. After try all the strategies of back mechanic, the book, and the pain is still there, what to do?
Well, I could answer that several different ways. When I look at the #1 reason of people coming to Backfitpro with back pain, we always say, read back mechanic first. And if it doesn't work for you, all right, you need to see an expert clinician. And so they all read back mechanic, but they've failed to realize what their pain triggers are. So they don't realize that every time they get out of the chair, the first move is they raise their chest, they default their spine into extension, and then they stand another, or they bend over, and the first move is hard into extension. So that is a maladaptive behavior. They didn't realize that's what they did. So now when we say, stand up tall and drop your right shoulder back, oh yeah, that's my pain. Not realizing that they do that extension trigger all day long. So it's a failure to know what their triggers are. That would probably be the #1 cause. The second failure to get better is inappropriate volume. So what I mean by that is they think training harder will be better to get out of pain, and it's usually the opposite. Allow the adaptation of the tissues to occur. Once you've given appropriate exercise stimulation, let the adaptation occur. But they think, oh no, I'm going to beat this pain out of my body with more exercise. And that's usually not the way to go. But I can give you a statistic because we follow up with every patient and we know these numbers. If you take a client who says, I've done everything, I've worked with my trainer, I've done all of this exercise, and I still have back pain. I've been to the physical therapist and they've done different things with me. I've been to the chiropractor, I've been to the massage therapist, I've been to yoga class, I've been to the surgeon and had a surgical consult. And everybody says, I've tried everything. The only thing I have left as an option is surgery. So if the person comes being told you've tried everything and surgery is your only option, if they follow back mechanic, 95% of them will avoid surgery. So I know that statistic. Now, there's still 5%, and not everybody will get better. We know that there's 5% that will do better with the surgery, but there's still 95% when guided appropriately can avoid the surgery, and 2 years later, they're glad that they did. So there's a statistic that I can tell you.
Very good, very good. How to treat an anterior listosy first place degree of L3 on L4? Did you understand this clearly?
Yeah, listhesis is a deformation in the spine. It's usually damage where one vertebra slips forward on the other. Can you see that slippage that I'm creating with my finger?
Yes.
So if it's less than 25% of the difference, that's called a grade 1. 50% of the distance is a grade 2. 75 is a grade 3, etc. So what was the answer? What was the question again? How do we treat the listhesis?
How to treat an anterior listosy first place degree of L3 on L4?
All right. Well, again, that will be a personal question from a person who undoubtedly has that. We'll need to do an assessment and find out what the precise pain triggers are. Sometimes doing bird dog exercises are able to align that a little bit better. Sometimes it's not the listhesis, but it's the movement around the listhesis. And if they learn to use their hips more than their spine for moving, that will allow the listhesis to gristle and not move so much. Sometimes it's the listhesis, but they might reach and pull a door, and the listhesis has a little bit of a micro movement. And then another time it moves this way. And those kind of patients will say, you know, I was bending forward to flush the toilet and someone, or I was pulling to lift my child and I was just moving and I got a catch through the neutral range of motion. So again, we're doing pattern recognition, and these are all characters of specific pain mechanisms. So once we know that, then we'll know how to strategically address that pain mechanism.
Very good. Again, the assessment is always very important, right?
Yes, yes.
And I let last one, not the last one, because I have one personal question in the end, but I let the last question for about your story with Brian Carroll. Please tell us a brief story between you and Brian Carroll.
Well, as you know, we wrote the book called Gift of Injury with Brian, and he was a world-class powerlifter, and he held the record for squatting the most load in 2 different weight categories. And he called me up on the phone. I knew his name, but I didn't know him personally. Yes, that book. And he said, this is Brian Carroll here. I've hurt my back. Would you see me? So he's from Florida. He flew up to Canada, and I saw him, and he really was in great pain. But what was curious was, here was one of the greatest squatters of all time. And I think of all time in geared powerlifting, he was ranked #2 through the 2000s and the early 2011, 12, 13. I think he hurt his back in 2013. And he was in so much pain. His movement was so corrupted. He'd forgotten how to squat because of the pain, which sounds crazy. But I showed him what his pain mechanisms were, and showed him how to move in ways that didn't trigger the pain. But he was so disgusted with himself. I mean, here was just a world-class athlete, and just so disappointed that his body had let him down with this injury. But the story was, he got out of pain fairly quickly. But when he showed me the MRIs, the damage was really substantial. He'd split his sacrum with a fracture front to back. L5 was fractured. The discs were really flattened and heavily damaged. And when he was out of pain, he said to me, "Good, now I want my world record back," because while he was injured, someone else had taken his world record. And I said, "Well, if you were my son, I would advise you just enjoy life without pain. That this was quite a substantial injury, and it's going to be really difficult to get back." He says, no, I want to train and, be competitive once again. So I said, well, here's what I know. I did a kyphoplasty. So when someone has a burst fracture, or someone has an osteoporotic fracture in their spine, the vertebra collapses down just a little bit, and the surgeon drills a hole in the side of the vertebra and then injects under pressure bone cement and tries to blow up and give integrity to the bone once again. So I tried that on a cadaver. I did a kyphoplasty with polymethyl methacrylate, PMMA, which is orthopedic bone cement. And it kept leaking out of the fracture. And we'd been trying to develop artificial discs for years, but the problem was we couldn't contain the nucleus gel pressure. So I then said, the only thing I have left that I can try is bone callousing, which was an exercise-based approach to callus in the fracture, seal it up. And but it takes a very special person, because I said for a year, you're not going to lift. But every 5 days, you'll stimulate the bone with mild exercise, and then allow, in those 5 days of rest, scaffolding in of the new bone. Anyway, long story short, he did it for almost a year. He cheated on me at the very end, but he was very successful. And when you look in the book, Gift of Injury, it shows the MRIs of when he first showed up, and then after appropriate mechanostimulation. So exercise is king. You know, we hear these stories about the body being degenerating, or a person has degenerative disc disease. It's such a shame, because the body's doing the opposite. It's struggling valiantly to regenerate, not degenerate. But it's a matter of getting the exercise right to assist the regeneration and adaptation, and not turn that into more, destruction. Yeah, but anyway, that's the Brian Carroll story. And I said, well, if you can come back and be competitive again, there's a book in there. We'll write a book together. And he came back and he won the Arnolds the next 2 years in a row, just to prove it wasn't a fluke. And I believe he's going to be in competition. He still is to this day. So he's lifted over 1,000 pounds, well over 50 times now in competition.
Very good. Which is, he's a new father too, right? I saw that.
He is, yeah. He's got twin girls.
I saw this. Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. So I think we cover all the questions from our audience, and I have one last question for me. Few weeks ago, I saw a guy in Brazil that people believe that he's an expertise our expertise guy in low back pain and exercise for this situation. And he mentioned that planks exercise is not so good for your spine because planks exercise cause what we call as a
shear.
Shear.
Yeah.
Cause shear. And he started to encourage people to avoid planks. What is your opinion on that? And what is your thoughts on this kind of a shear procedure or shear force when you do a regular plank?
Right. Well, I've measured this. So let's go back to a bridge. A bridge, assume that's a bridge and the abutment of the bridge holds it up at one end, and then you hold up the other bridge and then you drive traffic, which bends down in the middle. So it's a 3-point bend, up, up, and in the middle it goes down. That causes a bending load. There's zero shear. So when you do a plank, it's a 3-point bend. There's no shear. However, there's a bending load. Now, if I bend over like this, that is a cantilever. So now you hold the bridge like this and you apply load on it, which is my upper body, and the base of the cantilever is my hips and low back. That's what causes a shear. So a bent over row would cause shear, a kettlebell swing would cause shear, but the beauty of the plank is it does not create shear. It creates only a bend. So that's the engineering analysis of it. But he might be right in that the plank might not be the appropriate exercise for the person, but it won't be for the sheer reason.
Yeah, like the plank could not be appropriate for everyone, right?
Well, that's correct, but it really has minimum shear. That's the beauty. So if a person has shear intolerance, the plank is usually a good start, but we wouldn't start with that. We'd start with the modified curl up, as you know, and the plank would be a graduation and a progression.
Few steps later. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so doctor, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this, and I truly believe that people in Brazil will love this information, and hope see you soon.
Okay, thank you so much for all you do, Carlos.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
Obrigado. Okay, and I can create the edition later. So, doctor, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was really good. And I don't want to take so much of your time. Just one question. Let me just stop here.